Mega Man 2 wasn't the first Mega Man, it wasn't the Mega Man where they established the formula, but it was definitely the definitive Mega Man.
That game, I spent a lot of time playing that game.
It's a phenomenal game, and it totally set the tone for every other Mega Man game.
I also spent a lot of time just watching the intro over and over.
It is really like the perfect Mega Man game, if there ever was one. It is like, you know, hey, check it out. You know, great bosses, awesome level designs, you know, cool weapons.
Even if you look back on it now, that game still actually looks pretty amazing, just the artwork in it and these huge, really cool looking characters.
The game had robot chickens and robot gorillas and robot rabbits.
I mean, it just was so much fun to look at, and all the different levels were so cool, and Quickman stage was so messed up and made you so angry, but you wanted to get through it and finish it.
Mega Man 2 was rad because they put in password stuff for it. In a lot of ways, I think I probably enjoyed the bosses in Mega Man 1 a lot more, but just because you had to do it all in one sitting and it was just so harsh, you know, Mega Man 2 was kind of better by default.
Yeah. High quality box art for this game right here.
And the really, really horrible English translation in that game, that was something else too. I remember probably losing sleep trying to figure out whether it was Crashman or Clashman. I think the manual said Clashman and the game said Crashman. Neither one made sense.
Yeah, great stuff. A lot of that box art on those old games was awesome, I guess you could say.
Everyone has their own process, right, for like the best way to get through Mega Man 2. That's how you can tell it's a classic, because people have arguments not just about, oh dude, I beat this game, but how to beat the game.
As far as Mega Man games go, there really is nothing better than Mega Man 2.
Metroid. I didn't like Metroid. Isn't the one where it was a chick?
Metroid is crazy. That game...
Metroid was way, way ahead of its time, simply by virtue of the fact that it was completely non-linear.
Like, you look back on that now, and it just seems so insane. It's this huge world, there's no map, the instructions don't really tell you anything about what you need to do, where to go.
Metroid just gave you one gigantic planet to explore, and that was it. You could just go anywhere. You found weapons that naturally opened up new paths to new areas, but it was basically just a giant game of exploration, which was totally unheard of at the time.
You know, there wasn't a whole lot like that. There wasn't a whole lot where you just continually, you know, got tons of stuff and it was an action game to boot, right?
I can't imagine finishing Metroid unless I had a bunch of maps to go on. And
you know, I think that's like a clear-cut case of how games, generally speaking, are easier now, is because that just wouldn't fly now. If someone said, here's an 8-page manual, here's go.
The other thing, looking back on that game, was it was cool that it was serious, like it had, you know, a real kind of science fiction feel to it, as opposed to the kind of comic booky other stuff that was on the system at the time.
Metroid meant something. Metroid was the game that felt serious back then.
I remember the long, boring codes for Metroid more than I remember any actual gameplay.
I must have had like 50,000 pieces of paper around my house with just all these numbers, you know, written on it. My parents thought I was totally insane.
The graphics in that game really bothered me. Like, I didn't understand what was going on with the main character. I thought it was some weird alien thing, and it took me a while to realize that it's someone running around in a suit. And then it was really cool to realize that it's actually a woman, and then it was kind of not cool to realize it's a woman in a bikini.
It's a girl, and you're feeling a bit weird, you know, and especially you're an adolescent here, and you already got the hormones and the weird feelings going on, and you just realize, I played the entire game as a girl, and you know, it kind of makes you question some things, really.
Dragon Warrior was awesome. That game was so cool.
Dragon Warrior is a notable RPG simply because it was the first big Japanese RPG to make it to America.
It was so different than everything else out there just because it was so much more involved, and it had the slimes.
Dragon Warrior was really the first RPG that I ever played, and it took a while for me to get into it because the language is kind of dense for one thing. So I'm a little kid about 7 or 8 years old playing, and the king is talking like thee and thou and all this stuff, and
fortune smiles upon thee, thou hast found the torch. So you got to learn proper English along the way, which is nice.
The thing about Dragon Warrior is that it's really, I consider it to be the precursor for all console role-playing games. Stuff that Dragon Warrior did, 15 years ago or so, you'll still see in console role-playing games today.
It established that level grind really, really well, and basically role-playing games today, 20 years later, are still ripping off the original Dragon Warrior. It's definitely the game that defined that Japanese RPG blueprint of finding better stuff, getting stronger, fighting tougher and tougher monsters, and just putting you in that addictive loop.
Kind of got me hooked on RPGs just because it was an interesting concept that you could play and play and play and play, and then just turn it off and start back up, and you could keep going and continue the adventure.
By today's standards, Dragon Warrior seems kind of primitive, right? It's got these primitive NES graphics. You're only controlling one character, you're only fighting one monster. But for its time, it was a really, really long, lengthy, engrossing role-playing game.
Probably not as many people would have been exposed to Dragon Warrior as were if it weren't for this magazine right here, Nintendo Power, who ran a big promotion and actually gave away free copies of the game with new subscriptions. So you have to figure maybe they pressed far more copies of Dragon Warrior than they meant to, or than the market would bear. So they kind of sent a bunch of them out there for people who just bought the magazine. But that was undoubtedly a lot of NES fans' first exposure to the Japanese RPG.
But yeah, Dragon Warrior was another one of those games where, it just took so long to do it, and it's like, back then it seemed like it was just like months or something you were toiling away at this game, and now you go back to some of these games and read a walkthrough and decide, well, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna play Dragon Warrior again, and 6 hours later it's like over, oh, huh. I guess I just wasn't real smart when I was a kid.